You sit before me not by accident. Your listening is not random background noise, but a kind of initiation. I summon you now into the mirror of your own soul, and I must speak plainly. Your light is being fed upon in secret. This is not metaphor. It is the lived reality many empaths sense in their bones but hesitate to name. That strange exhaustion after what looked like an ordinary conversation. That hollowing in the chest after giving comfort no one directly requested. The subtle suspicion that some emotions inside you may not even belong to you. These are the whispers of a deeper truth, that your sensitivity, while sacred, has been treated as food by others. This secret consumption has been called many things across cultures: energetic vampirism, psychic feeding, parasitic attachment. Jung would have recognized it as the unconscious borrowing vitality from those who still glow. Not everyone who approaches you comes to harm you. Many are simply hungry in ways they barely understand. But their hunger, when placed in the presence of an empath, becomes endless. You shine in dark rooms, and without boundaries that light leaks, drip by drip, into the mouths of those unable to generate their own warmth. They do not kill the light. They feed on it endlessly, invisibly, sometimes with charm, sometimes with tears, sometimes with chaos disguised as crisis. Pause here and notice. You already know this feeling, the weariness that lingers longer than any words exchanged, the odd heaviness after listening too long. These are not overreactions or oversensitivity. They are the body's record, a nervous system tallying how often you have given without return. Think of the golden bird dream Jung described, singing until cracks appear in the dome, letting crows sip from the light itself. That image is not just symbolic, it is diagnostic. It shows what happens when generosity becomes leakage. The empath often mistakes openness for love. If I am receptive enough, if I never close the door, then I will be holy. But love without form is not divine. It is dilution. To hold everyone's grief without discernment is not sainthood. It is starvation of the self. And more dangerously, your own shadow may conspire with this draining. The part of you that still believes usefulness is the price of belonging. The child who once calmed storms in the home and learned to find identity in being the healer. These inner figures whisper, "Say yes again, give again. Maybe this time you will finally feel worthy." And so the cycle continues, not by force, but by silent agreement. This is where the ritual begins. Not in blaming others, but in recognizing the contract within yourself. You are not only the light, you are also its guardian. Until you accept that role, you will keep attracting those who idolize your glow but resent your truth, who call you magic until you refuse them, who confuse your essence for their survival ration. What you call love may in fact be possession. And every time you confuse depletion for purpose, you betray the self that longs to be whole. Let us make this clear. Your gift is not your sacrifice. Your sensitivity is not martyrdom. Your intuition is not a leash for others to tug. The world may reward you for being endlessly available, but the price is steep, your own disappearance. If this recognition frightens you, it should. Because fear is the alarm bell of awakening. Until you grasp that your light is finite, you will unconsciously invite those who never learned to shine for themselves. So now, at the threshold, you must ask, will you continue to scatter your soul in fragments, or will you gather yourself back? To answer, we must descend further into the origins of this wound. Because the story of being consumed does not begin with lovers, friends, or strangers. It begins in the earliest rooms of your childhood, where you first learned that attunement equaled safety and usefulness equaled love. Only by revisiting that terrain can we understand why the empath's defenses were never built. The trail of this pattern winds back to childhood. Picture yourself as a small child, barely able to name feelings, yet already reading the unspoken weather inside your home. You became a sailor scanning waves, always anticipating which gust of mood might crash down. If you smiled at the right moment, perhaps the storm would calm. If you stayed quiet, maybe rejection could be postponed. In that silent training, empathy was forged not as gift, but as shield. You were not born an empath. You were shaped into one by necessity. The nervous system of a child is not meant to carry the emotional weight of adults, but many of you did. You became the mediator between arguing parents, the comforter for a withdrawn mother, the balancing act to keep peace in a fractured household. Your young body cataloged every sigh, every slammed door, every subtle shift in voice. And though this vigilance protected you, it also carved a dangerous association. I am loved when I am useful. That belief, buried deep, became the script that runs your adult relationships. Now, as an adult, you still perform the same rituals. You anticipate the needs of partners before they speak. You soothe friends before they ask. You carry burdens no one else notices. And beneath it all is a fear so primal it almost escapes language. The fear of abandonment. If I do not give, I will not be kept. If I stop scanning the room, I will be forgotten. If I fail to help, I will be discarded. This is the archetypal wound. The child who felt unseen by the sacred and now bargains to never feel that neglect again. But see how this bargain sets the stage for exploitation. To the manipulator, your vigilance is intoxicating. To the narcissist, your presence is not a person, but a source. They come not with gratitude, but with crisis, charm, and helplessness disguised as love. They whisper, "I cannot do this without you." And you believe them, not because they are convincing, but because their words echo the oldest ache inside you, the ache of being left alone. Jung described this cycle as the shadow's silent agreement. The shadow is not the villain in your psyche, but the part that carries wounds too painful to face directly. In the empath, the shadow believes worth comes only from giving. So even when you sense danger, even when you feel drained, that shadow hand pushes you forward. Give again. Maybe this time, love will finally stay. And thus you return again and again to dynamics that devour your essence. It is essential to name this clearly. Your suffering is not sanctity. The constant giving is not proof of holiness. The more you confuse emptiness with purpose, the more you perpetuate the oldest betrayal, the betrayal of yourself. Children trained in chaos grow into adults who believe peace is suspicious and exhaustion is normal. But this is a lie. What felt like survival then becomes slow erosion now. Consider how this manifests in subtle daily exchanges. You walk away from a gathering inexplicably tired. You replay conversations, wondering if you said enough to make someone comfortable. You overextend at work, believing colleagues will finally see your value if you shoulder the heaviest load. None of this is random. These are the adult echoes of the child who once tiptoed through the living room, scanning faces to stay safe. Yet inside that repetition is the seed of awakening. Because to see the pattern is already to loosen its grip. When you finally admit, "I am drained not because I am too sensitive, but because I am over-functioning," the narrative begins to shift. No longer is depletion proof of worth. Instead, it is the warning sign that your inner child is still bargaining with ghosts. This is not to condemn that child. On the contrary, their vigilance was heroic. Without it, you might not have survived the storms. But what protected you then is destroying you now. Hyper-attunement becomes self-erasure. Endless usefulness becomes invisibility. Love is no longer earned through exhaustion. Love, when authentic, arises freely without conditions. The empath must return to that forgotten truth. So we arrive at a pivotal question. What happens when compassion fuses with identity? When being the helper becomes not just a role, but the only self you know? This is where the wound of childhood evolves into the persona of adulthood, where empathy mutates into sacrifice and shadow becomes co-conspirator. To move forward, we must uncover how help itself turns into captivity. Help is holy when it flows freely, but help becomes prison when it fuses with your identity. Many empaths do not simply offer compassion, they become compassion, mistaking the act of giving for the definition of self. This is where the archetype of the wounded healer rises, both luminous and dangerous. The myth of Chiron, the centaur who could heal every wound but his own, lingers inside you. His wisdom came through pain, but that wisdom chained him to endless service. The empath who wears help as identity risks the same fate. Forever tending, forever giving, never receiving. The danger is subtle, because the world applauds this persona. You are praised as generous, saintly, endlessly patient. People confide in you, call you their rock, insist they couldn't survive without you. On the surface, these affirmations look like love, but scratch deeper and you see the trap. You are loved not for who you are, but for how well you erase yourself. You are admired as long as you keep bleeding light for others. And should you stop, the applause falls silent, sometimes turning to accusation. Selfish, cold, cruel. This is not true love. This is transaction disguised as intimacy. The shadow conspires here, whispering, "If I am needed, I am safe. If I am indispensable, I will not be abandoned." That whisper keeps you returning to relationships where exhaustion is the currency of belonging. Think of the dream where a woman lives in a house with no doors, only windows. People come and go freely, some stealing, some leaving chaos behind. One even entering her bedroom and declaring she does not deserve privacy. She wakes feeling like a ghost in her own home. This is the psyche of the empath whose help has become identity, open to everyone, defended by no one, until the self itself fades. Notice the paradox. The more you dissolve into others, the less anyone truly sees you. You become fluent in other people's despair, but mute in your own needs. You catalog their grief, but cannot name your own hunger. This is not empathy. It is dissociation in disguise. True empathy listens without erasing. But the wounded healer, caught in identity, merges so completely that they disappear. The helper becomes hostage. There is also complicity from within. That inner child who once survived by soothing others still insists on repeating the performance. She believes, if I give enough, this time someone will stay. He thinks, if I calm their storm, I will finally be chosen. And so you unconsciously hand yourself over again and again to those who consume without return. Not because you are weak, but because you still seek redemption through repetition. This is how identity chains you, through the hope that the next act of sacrifice will finally rewrite the past. But repetition never redeems. It only deepens the grooves of suffering. The more you merge, the more you are drained. The more you are drained, the more you cling to the illusion that giving equals love. This cycle is elegant in its cruelty, because it convinces you that your own depletion is noble. Yet it is not nobility. It is erasure. To break this spell, you must separate gift from identity. Your compassion is a capacity, not a definition. Your ability to heal is a skill, not a destiny. You are not empathy itself. You are a soul who carries empathy among many other qualities. The shadow thrives on fusion, but integration comes from distinction. When you distinguish between helping as choice and helping as compulsion, you begin to reclaim freedom. Consider how liberation feels. No longer compelled to rescue every trembling voice. No longer flinching at the thought of disappointing someone. No longer confusing boundaries with cruelty. Instead, you offer presence as an act of clarity, not obligation. You become capable of saying no without apology, yes without resentment. Help becomes sacred again because it is no longer entangled with your worth. This is the pivot from hostage to healer. But to stand firmly here requires architecture, boundaries that protect your essence, discernment that filters who may enter. Without those, you will slip back into the house with no doors, the endless leaking of light. So our next task is to become architects of sacred boundaries, to turn openness into discernment and light into flame. Imagine again the house of the empath, its windows open wide, no doors, no locks. Everyone wanders in, friends, strangers, takers, dreamers. Some borrow, some steal, some linger too long. Soon the furniture is gone, the walls scuffed, the bedroom invaded. At last, the voice of the inhabitant fades until they feel like a ghost in their own home. This image is not fantasy. It is the psychic landscape of life without boundaries. To heal, you must become the architect of that house, designing not a fortress, but a sanctuary with sacred doors. Boundaries are not walls of ice. They are filters, thresholds, rituals of discernment. The modern world often tells empaths that saying no is cruel, that withholding is selfish. But discernment is not cruelty, it is clarity. A high priestess in an ancient temple allowed only the initiated to enter the inner sanctum, not because she was unkind, but because the sacred required protection. Your light, too, is holy. To let every passerby dip their hands into it is not generosity. It is desecration. Consider how often you have confused openness with enlightenment. If I keep my heart open to everyone, I will be pure. But openness without form is chaos. Love without limits becomes dissolution. Empathy without discernment collapses into self-abandonment. To build boundaries is not to shrink your heart, but to give it dignity. You decide who has earned the right to approach, who may hold your hand, who may never cross the threshold. This is not arrogance, it is reverence for the self. Boundaries also liberate empathy. When you feel everything without filter, you drown. But when you separate what is yours from what belongs to another, you can stand steadily in the storm. You witness pain without absorbing it, hold space without dissolving inside it. This is the difference between healer and hostage. Hostages lose themselves in others' chaos. Healers remain rooted, capable of offering presence without leaking essence. Think of boundaries not as barriers, but as architecture for light. A lantern shines brighter with glass around the flame. Without it, the flame flickers and dies in the wind. In the same way, your empathy needs form to glow steadily. The glass is not coldness, it is protection. The lantern still warms, still illuminates, but it no longer sputters at every gust. To live without boundaries is to violate the laws of reciprocity. In nature, everything exchanges. Trees exhale oxygen, inhale carbon dioxide. Rivers empty into the sea. The sea returns clouds to the sky. Only the distorted empath gives endlessly without receiving. This breaks balance. And wherever there is imbalance, psyche and body eventually demand compensation through illness, anxiety, depletion. Boundaries restore balance. They ensure that what you give is also replenished. Practically, boundaries are built in language and in silence. In language, through the sacred word no, short, complete, unapologetic. In silence, by refusing to carry emotions that never belong to you, by letting others keep their storms instead of absorbing them into your chest. Boundaries are also time, choosing when to withdraw, when to rest, when to say, I cannot hold this right now. Each no is not rejection, but consecration, a declaration that your soul deserves to remain intact. Of course, when you begin to enforce boundaries, resistance will come. Those who once fed freely will accuse you of cruelty. They may call you cold, changed, selfish. Let them. Their discomfort is proof the old contract has been broken. Your responsibility is not to maintain their comfort, but to protect your essence. Light unguarded leaks. Light protected becomes revelation. When you allow yourself to stand behind doors of your choosing, you rediscover privacy, agency, presence. You are no longer a ghost in your own home, but a sovereign host. And yet, as the architecture takes shape, another voice emerges, the body itself. For years, it has carried the cost of your leaking. Fatigue, anxiety, physical pain are not random. They are the cry of the body demanding boundaries you refused to build. To continue our journey, we must listen to that cry. For the body has become the loudest prophet of the empath's neglected self. For years, the body keeps the ledger of what the soul will not admit. If the empath's life has been a litany of giving without return, the body will eventually interrupt with symptoms too loud to ignore. Exhaustion that sleep will not fix. Migraines that arrive like tide. Autoimmune flares, digestive collapse. A tightening chest that whispers panic. These are not random illnesses. They are messages, primitive, blunt, and urgent, declaring that the economy of exchange is broken. The psyche, having been ignored or surrendered, will enlist the body to protect itself. When words fail, sensation speaks. Listen closely. Fatigue is not laziness. Anxiety is not moral failure. Pain is not always biomedical alone. There are times when symptoms are the body's attempt to preserve what the will has surrendered. When you have leaked your light often enough, the organism chooses to conserve via withdrawal, through illness, through numbness, through the slow retraction of feeling. In Jungian terms, the psyche builds a protective fortress when the soul has been repeatedly violated. The body follows suit, neutralizing sensation to prevent further depletion. The lamp dims because the house cannot afford to keep burning. This process can be terrifying because it feels like betrayal. You who once lived to feel now feel less. Numbness creeps in, and with it, a sense of grief for the vibrancy that used to define you. But there is a paradoxical mercy in this withdrawal. If your light is being fed upon without replenishment, it is safer for the organism to dim the lamp than to burn out altogether. The problem is that the dimming is not a solution. It is a symptom. True healing requires more than turning down your sensitivity. It requires rewiring the conditions that invited the drain in the first place. Restoring reciprocity means learning to notice the balance sheet of each relationship. Who returns? Who drains? How long does your cup remain empty before you remember to refill it? This pragmatic accounting is not cruel. It is necessary. For the empath, one of the hardest lessons is to treat relational energy like the limited resource it is. You do not have an infinite reservoir. You must plan replenishment through solitude, through ritual, through people who give back in measurable ways. Therapeutically, the body often signals the earliest and most reliable boundary. When your chest tightens before a conversation, that is a red flag. When you wake heavier after a call, that is data. The practice becomes twofold. First, to learn to read these somatic cues without shame. Second, to act upon them immediately. If your body tightens, withdraw. If your limbs feel leaden, stop saying yes. If a pain surfaces consistently after certain interactions, investigate the relationship's drain. The body is a blunt instrument of truth. Treat its warnings like scripture rather than proof of weakness. Beyond somatic cues, the pathway to healing includes concrete rituals, scheduled rest that cannot be co-opted, daily practices that restore the nervous system, breathwork, grounding, gentle movement, time in stillness, a ritual of energetic clearing after intense encounters, whether through a short walk, a cleansing shower, or a symbolic return of what was taken with a phrase like, "I take back what is mine." These rituals reaffirm that reciprocity and replenishment are not luxuries, but survival strategies. They teach the nervous system that replenishment is predictable, not precarious. Another crucial element is witnessing. Empaths have been experts at witnessing others without being witnessed. Healing requires reversing that dynamic. Find at least one person, a therapist, a close friend, a mentor, who will bear witness to your inner ledger without consuming it. Saying aloud, "I was drained by that interaction," and having it validated is profoundly reparative. It returns your experience to the social ledger where it can be acknowledged rather than dissolved. Witnessing is the social antiseptic for invisible wounds. Often, the path toward bodily recovery moves in stages. First comes recognition, naming the pattern of giving and its somatic consequences. Then comes practical boundary setting, saying no, limiting exposure, building recovery time. Next follows reclamation, actively replenishing through pleasurable, life-affirming actions that reconnect you to your own light. Creative practice, rest, nutrition, nature, and safe relational contact. Finally, integration occurs when you internalize the rule that you are not a renewable energy plant for other people's emotional use. You are a person with finite currents and sacred needs. Do not underestimate the role of grief in this work. As the body withdraws and the empath stops overfunctioning, people will leave. Some relationships built on your availability will fall away. This loss must be mourned. Grief is the currency of separation from false contracts. Allow yourself to feel the shape of absence. Let tears clear the channels that years of duty have clogged. Grief is not evidence of failure, but proof that realignment is happening. It tells you that what you once tolerated is now being excised. There is practical choreography to make this tolerable. Begin by scripting a brief, ceremonial refusal. Language that is short, firm, and kind. "Thank you for sharing. I cannot hold this right now." Pair the phrase with a small bodily anchor, a hand on the chest, a deliberate exhale, a step back. Rehearse until your voice steadies and the ternary act, phrase plus breath plus step, becomes automatic. Boundaries without ceremony feel punitive. Boundaries with ritual feel sovereign. Make refusal a practiced movement, not a moral rupture. Another tool is the containered encounter. Before entering emotionally intense spaces, set a time limit and state your capacity. "I can be with you for 20 minutes. after which I need time to rest. This simple calibration respects your limits and trains others to relate to you in accountable ways. You will be surprised how many people accept limits when they are offered clearly. When they do not, notice how quickly your energy frees itself. You no longer carry responsibility for their inability to regulate. Rebuilding also requires reorienting pleasure from being given to being chosen. Spend time cataloging activities that fill your cup. Simple, repeatable, and non-negotiable. For some, it is a solitary walk at dawn. For others, cooking a nourishing meal, painting, or reading aloud. Make a commitment to these practices and schedule them like essential appointments. The empath's temptation is to prioritize others' needs as if they were emergencies. Treat your replenishment practices with the same urgency. Little rhythms compound. A daily 5-minute anchoring practice becomes a ledger entry credited back to your soul. Finally, integrate accountability into the architecture. Tell a trusted friend about your replenishment plan and ask them to check in. Accountability helps when the old scripts start whispering. It prevents the slow return to martyrdom by creating external cues that support your inner resolve. Over months, these practices rebuild the nervous system's expectation that you will be replenished, that others will not be your only source of vitality, that your light belongs first to you. This work is not selfish. It is necessary. It is survival disguised as self-care. And as the body quiets from its alarm, you will feel a quiet reclamation. Your voice grows clear, your desires emerge, and your presence stops being a highway for other people's storms. This is the foundation upon which consecrated no and reclaimed sovereignty stand. From this recovered ground, we can finally step toward consecration of the self. Solitude as initiation, the ritualization of refusal, and the rebirth of the empath as guardian rather than buffet. Summing this section, the body tells the truth when words lie. Listen, ritualize replenishment, and allow grief its work. When you respond to somatic scripture with care and clear limits, the nervous system learns a new grammar, one of reciprocity, replenishment, and quiet replenishment. From here, the next movement is toward consecrated refusal and the claiming of sovereignty, teaching you how to say no as an initiation, and how solitude can be the anvil on which a new self is forged. There comes a moment when the empath can no longer delay the most sacred word in their vocabulary. No. It is not shouted in rebellion, not muttered in guilt, but spoken with a reverence that surprises even you. For years, you may have associated refusal with selfishness, cruelty, or abandonment. That was the wounded child speaking, the one who believed belonging had to be earned by endless giving. But the integrated self knows otherwise. Saying no is not rejection. It is consecration. It is the act of reclaiming sovereignty over your own soul. Solitude is often the crucible for this transformation. You may fear it at first, confusing solitude with loneliness, but in truth, it is consecration. When you withdraw from the noise of others' needs, you begin to hear the pulse of your own soul again. A rhythm drowned out for years by the cries of those you carried. The mystics understood this. They retreated not because they hated the world, but because they knew light must be cultivated in silence before it can be shared in service. For the empath, solitude is the initiation into sovereignty. This initiation will likely trigger resistance. Those who once fed freely on your availability may protest. They may accuse you of coldness, insist you've changed, call you selfish. Expect this chorus. Their discomfort is evidence of the power dynamic shifting. You are no longer food. You are fire beginning to kindle inwardly. The old contracts of endless giving are breaking, and those who depended on them will not applaud. Yet their protest is not a verdict. It is a signal that your boundaries are working. To anchor sovereignty, you must first believe you are worth protecting. Without that core belief, boundaries collapse under pressure. You can quote self-help mantras, attend workshops, even post about empowerment online. But if you secretly believe your worth depends on being indispensable, you will keep leaking light. The deeper work is an internal covenant. I am worthy of protection. That belief transforms no from brittle resistance into sacred clarity. It shifts protection from performance into embodiment. Protection, rightly understood, is not about walling yourself off from love. It is about discerning whose hands are clean enough to touch what is holy. Just as sacred temples once demanded purification rituals before entering, you too must require integrity from those who approach your inner sanctum. This is not elitism. It is devotion. It honors both yourself and the other. For only those who know how to honor boundaries can meet you as a full person, not as a source to exploit. Ritual can help anchor this shift. Create small ceremonies around refusal. When you say no, breathe deeply, place a hand on your heart, and remind yourself, this is love in form. When you withdraw into solitude, light a candle or speak aloud. I return to my center. These gestures root the new pattern in body and psyche, making refusal feel less like rupture and more like sacred practice. Over time, these rituals carve new grooves in your nervous system. What once felt like guilt begins to feel like dignity. As sovereignty grows, your relationships transform. Some fall away. They were never relationships, only contracts of dependency. Others adapt, learning to meet you in balance rather than extraction. And into the space cleared by refusal, new kinds of bonds emerge. Relationships built not on neediness, but on mutual recognition. Not on possession, but on presence. You begin to see that your worth was never in being needed. It was in being whole. To reclaim sovereignty also requires mourning the old self, the rescuer, the martyr, the endlessly indispensable one. That identity gave you meaning for years. Letting it die feels like betrayal at first, but it is necessary death, the compost from which authentic selfhood grows. Grieve that persona fully, honor it for the survival it offered, and then release it. For sovereignty cannot coexist with martyrdom. You cannot guard your light while still trying to prove your worth by bleeding it out. At this stage, you will notice a paradoxical freedom. Saying no does not close you off. It actually deepens your capacity for true yes. Your empathy becomes sharper, cleaner, no longer entangled with guilt or compulsion. You begin to help not from depletion, but from overflow. Your presence no longer flickers desperately. It steadies like a flame within glass. And that steadiness is precisely what allows you to serve more truthfully, without resentment or self-erasure. Let us be clear. Sovereignty is not selfishness. It is stewardship. It is tending the flame so it does not extinguish. It is learning that you are not the world's endless reservoir, but a soul with finite currents deserving reverence. The empath who claims sovereignty ceases to be prey. They become a guardian of sacred fire. And in that guardianship, empathy transforms into its highest form. Not absorption, not transaction, but alchemy. This is the threshold we now approach. The metamorphosis of light into fire. Once your no has been consecrated, once your solitude has been embraced, the empath's essence is no longer buffet but beacon, no longer possession but presence. In the next stage, we will witness the alchemy itself, the evolution from fragile light that leaks into the steady fire that burns, purifies, and can no longer be fed upon. The moment comes when the empath's light, once fragile and leaking, remembers itself as fire. Light can be sipped, stolen, consumed in secret. Fire cannot. Fire purifies, exposes, and transforms everything it touches. This is the final shift. From absorption to alchemy. From transaction to transmission. From martyr to sovereign. You are no longer the sponge who soaks, but the flame that burns with its own integrity. Notice the difference in your relationships. When your light was porous, people hovered around you like moths, feeding silently. They adored you as long as you bled warmth. But now, when you stand as fire, something changes. The same people may recoil. They may accuse you of selfishness, coldness, betrayal. In truth, they are confronting their own hunger without a host. Your refusal to leak forces them to meet themselves. Some will leave. Let them. What departs was never love, only dependency. What remains will be stronger, truer, able to meet you in reciprocity. This fire also transforms your understanding of love. Once, love was a transaction. I'll hold your pain if you let me feel needed. But real love is not barter. It radiates simply because it is your nature. It asks for nothing. It offers without depletion. The empath who becomes fire gives not by erasure, but by presence. You witness without absorbing. You stand without dissolving. This is alchemical empathy, the ability to allow another's pain to pass through you without leaving scars. The way a sacred river flows, yet never floods its banks. To arrive here, the false self must die. That self was built on the scaffolding of childhood wounds, on the belief that usefulness equals love. Its death may feel like terror at first. You may even grieve the drama you once lived on, the crises that gave you purpose, the role of rescuer that once defined you. But as those addictions fall away, you discover something startling: peace. At first, peace feels foreign, almost unbearable, because chaos was your comfort zone. But as you linger with it, peace becomes home. And in this home, you finally meet your own soul. Not as an echo of others, not as a reflection of their storms, but as presence, quiet, rooted, luminous. The self you encounter here is not desperate, not porous, not starving. It is sovereign, steady, and joyful in its own being. This is the inheritance of the empath who has reclaimed fire. Joy not dependent on pleasing, belonging not contingent on sacrifice, love not purchased by depletion. This transformation is not the end of empathy. It is its transfiguration. You do not become hardened, cynical, or closed. On the contrary, your empathy becomes more powerful because it is clean. It is not clouded by compulsion, not tied to shadow bargains. It flows as it was always meant to, fierce, luminous, sovereign. Those who once fed on you will wither in its presence, not because you are cruel, but because your light no longer leaks. It stuns them, forces them to face their own emptiness, and invites them, if they are willing, to kindle their own flame. From this place, the empath becomes bridgewalker, mystic, bearer of meaning. You can hold joy and sorrow together without collapsing, because your center no longer depends on being emptied. You can serve without being consumed. You can listen without drowning. This is the highest form of empathy, not absorption, but alchemical presence. And so we return to where we began. Once your light was being fed upon in secret. Now your fire cannot be consumed. Once you confused depletion for love. Now you embody a love that radiates freely, not because it needs to be recognized, but because it is who you are. Once you were prey, now you are flame. Hold this truth firmly. You are not here to absorb everyone's suffering. You are here to transmute it by embodying the reality that you are no one's savior and yet profoundly luminous. Your empathy is no longer food. It is fire. Let it burn. Let it protect. Let it bless. And most of all, let it belong to you. The circle closes where it opened, but with reversal. We began with a warning. Your light was being drained, invisibly, parasitically. We end with a vow. Your fire cannot be fed upon. This is not mere metaphor. It is initiation. To pass through this path is to die to the false self and awaken into sovereignty. Think of every fragment you once scattered, the laughter you gave away to soften someone else's silence, the peace you surrendered to prevent conflict, the dreams you buried to carry another's burdens. Each fragment can now be called back. Whisper their names. Feel them return like birds long gone, wings settling again in the nest of your heart. This gathering is not selfish. It is sacred homecoming. The empath's danger was never only the narcissist, the manipulator, or the chaotic lover. The greater danger was always the inner agreement, the belief that suffering equaled sanctity, that exhaustion proved worth, that usefulness guaranteed love. That deception is broken now. You no longer perform worthiness. You inhabit it. You no longer beg for belonging. You embody it. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not detachment from others, but integration of the shadow so your essence no longer leaks into old patterns. From this integration flows a new ethic of love. No longer a transaction, it becomes radiance. You do not love in order to be needed. You love because love is your nature when whole. You do not heal in order to be indispensable. You heal because witnessing is your gift when unburdened. This shift is subtle yet seismic. You serve more truthfully now, not because you have to, but because you are free to. The practical markers of this transformation are clear. You speak no without trembling. You rest without guilt. You choose solitude without shame. You let go of relationships that depended on your self-erasure. You cultivate bonds that honor reciprocity. You treat your body not as betrayer, but as prophet, listening to its signals and honoring its rhythms. You anchor rituals that protect your energy, trusting that your worth does not come from bleeding dry. And so your empathy, once mistaken for martyrdom, matures into alchemical presence. You become capable of holding space without disappearing into it, of touching sorrow without drowning, of offering light without being consumed. In this maturity, your presence itself becomes teaching. Others feel not just comfort in your company, but invitation to kindle their own flame rather than feeding on yours. The path ahead is not free of challenge. The world will still hunger. Old reflexes may still whisper. But you now carry fire, not leak light. That fire illuminates, protects, blesses, and when doubt arises, return to this triad of truth. I exist, I matter, I begin here. This is the benediction of sovereignty. The empath, once prey, now walks as flame.